Hey everyone, owning your own hostel. This is a dream for many travelers. Perhaps the most frequent email that we get at hostelmanagement.com is from aspiring hostel owners who want to know exactly how to do it. Unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all path to hostel ownership, so I'm frequently not able to lay this path out for someone. I have talked to so many hostel owners over the years, and their startup stories are all very different. They do all tend to have something in common, though. Recently, I talked with an aspiring hostel owner named Brett Berghauer, who I felt asked the perfect questions to get at the heart of this personality type that makes good hostel owner. So if you're just starting out with your hostel or it's still a dream on paper, I encourage you to watch this conversation with Brett. By the way, I volunteer with a disaster response organization called Team Rubicon, and tomorrow I'm flying to Louisiana to help with the cleanup and rebuilding after Hurricane Ida. So this upcoming week I will not be as available by email and WhatsApp. However, I do have a video scheduled that if all goes well will get published next Friday. It's all about getting travel vloggers and YouTubers to come stay at your hostel. If this is something you're interested in, be sure to subscribe if you're not already. Okay, on to the conversation with aspiring hostel owner, Brett Berghauer.
Hey, Brett. Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So you had some questions about maybe starting a hostel or either buying a hostel. Yeah. And so I just wanted to get on a call and help you out. And I do this kind of now and then, and I record it and then I just publish it for other people because a lot of people have the same questions as you.
Appreciate you putting some time aside to chat a little bit. Maybe I could start with my background with like hostels or what kind of inspired me to even get interested in looking into starting a hostel. I back in about 2007, it was I went over to Japan on a whim and hoping to perhaps find a job teaching English or something along those lines. I'd heard a lot of stories of people doing that over in Asia, being able to find a job easily if pay was decent, that type of thing. So I went and just as a tourist and ended up staying in a hostel for the first time in my life. And it wasn't a particularly glamorous or glitzy or real, fancy hostel. It was probably several decades old and a makeshift kind of situation. But the sense of community was very strong. And to make a long story short, I met some of my best friends and longest friends, and just the people that I met and the experience that I had, it really changed my life forever. Ended up staying in Japan for about 10 years. And I would say definitely as a result of those first kind of few months, I stayed in the hostel actually for about 3 months. And it was one of those, you could work there, volunteer there in exchange for room and board. I didn't do that, but there were other kind of longer term residents who I really connected with as a result of that arrangement. So anyway, that was just really a foundational experience in my life. And having traveled extensively since then and stayed in a few other hostels in various locations, there were good experiences. I had never quite tapped into that kind of magic formula that I experienced at that time at that place. That always stuck with me for many years, and I always reflected on that. And it was something not to necessarily recreate that situation, but I think I've gained so much inspiration from that experience. I thought I would really be able to apply that to perhaps a hostel of my own or something along those lines. So that's what got me interested. And I had been living out in the Bay Area, and I'm not exactly sure how I came across you and the Tradewinds hostel. At that time, I think you were looking for somebody to take over the business. So that's how I found you. And yeah, I was just really curious about your story and what led you to get into this kind of a business. And yeah, maybe we could start with that.
It was similar to you. I discovered hostels back when I was in the Navy and I was like, because I thought you had to be rich to travel. And so I joined the Navy to travel. But then I discovered hostels there and I'm like, what am I doing in the Navy? This is what I want to do. I discovered all these backpackers at a hostel in Australia. And so I got $1,600 and a one-way ticket and went to Europe and spent 2 years backpacking around in Europe. And it was a great experience, there are certain types of properties that have a je ne sais quoi. You called it a magic, and where the community comes first. And that's the kind of hostels that I actually promote. It's the kind of hostels that I want people to start. A lot of times they are small lifestyle hostels where the operators are living there, and it's their whole ethos. What we're starting to see now in the industry is all of these hostels that are just a business. And, not to say that lifestyle hostels aren't a business as well. We're even seeing big corporations getting in, real estate development companies getting into hostels. And they often have a very high quality product. If you're looking for just accommodation, great option, especially compared to hotels. But it's those small, intimate hostels like what you experienced that really changed my life. I was a very shy person, and I went into a hostel environment, and it's like you're immediately welcome. We say there's no strangers in hostels, only friends you haven't met. And so for me, that hostel was Inverness Student Hotel in Scotland. And I've tried to model everything after that. So when I was in Europe, I started studying what is it about a hostel that some of them are just a cheap place to stay. And some of them are these magical places where there's this vibrant community of travelers and people are sharing ideas and cooking meals together. A lot of it is the architecture, but also a lot of it is the people who actually run them. I often relate hostel owners, good hostel owners are much like a whitewater rafting guide. I don't know if you've ever been whitewater rafting before.
Hmm.
And they have a way, those personality types have a way of taking a boat full of six strangers. And by the end of the day, they're the best of friends, and the shared experiences down the river, the challenges down the river, and they have a sense of humor that they can relate to everybody in a different way and bring everyone together. So that's the thing that did it for me. And the fact that you were coming together in a community with nationalities that you would have never met, religions that you would have never met, races that you perhaps may have never had an intimate conversation with. And it really fosters this understanding where you say, wait a minute, we are all really so connected in this world. And it happens in all of these little hubs of hostels around the world. So that's how I got started.
Yeah, that a lot of that sounds exactly, basically similar to my experience as well.
Yeah.
And I think, as you mentioned, with some of the hostels that are maybe more business focused versus lifestyle or community focused, I've also noticed that. So basically, the place that I was in Japan, it was called Kaosen Tokyo Annex. And that was really my first experience. Soon after that, as I visited, more hostels, I certainly encountered some that were brand new, nice facilities, very clean, like you said, comparable to a nice hotel. And I never spoke or interacted with almost a single person when I was there, or even saw a single person. People would go in their rooms and then they would go out and then they would come back and they go to bed. And so I definitely I can bear witness to that as well. And that, as you said, that also really made me start considering what are the key differences here between a place like this and a place like the Kausen Annex. Yeah, I definitely understand that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the stuff that I focus on with hostelmanagement.com. How do you actually go from being just a hostel that's a cheap place to stay to being this awesome place that's life changing for your guests? So that's what I put into the Hostel Professionals Library. It's still an ongoing project because I'm basically taking all of my knowledge from 30 years and trying to get it on paper, mostly now on video, because I found that I'm not as good at writing as I am good at just talking. But to be able to get that je ne sais quoi and apply it to various types of hostels around the world. So you had a question by email of like, where would I start a hostel?
Yeah. So actually, two questions based on that. It's how did you actually start a hostel? How
Mhm,
did you find a place? How did you get the financing? How did you get a lease on the building? And where would you do it if you had to do it all over again?
mhm.
And maybe why did you choose San Francisco and why did you choose that location in San Francisco?
Yeah. First thing is that I think that a lot of hostel owners, particularly the ones that are these lifestyle hostels They're small properties, not hugely capital intensive compared to some of these larger hostels. It requires an element of dogged determination and a tenacity. I went to San Francisco when I was 26, when I started my hostel, and didn't have any money, but I just knew that I really wanted to start a hostel. And so I was working for a company that was doing field service of the lottery machines, where they sell the little lottery tickets. So I was able to drive all around the city and see all of these different buildings that I thought, oh, that might be a really great hostel. That might be a good hostel. First of all, I had to convince, because I didn't have any money to buy property, I had to convince a landlord that like this was perhaps a good idea. So if I remember right, I went to 12 different properties talking to the landlords. And I really didn't know anything about zoning or building codes or anything like that at this time. So I was just going to the landlords and saying, this is what I want to do. And they would say, no, no, you're not doing that here. What are you talking about? Sort of thing. And during that 12 different steps, I realized that I needed to refine my messaging. So just going to them and saying, hey, I want to do a hostel, that automatically, for people who at that time were older, they might have all sorts of images. Even people who don't really understand hostels, they have images of like dope smoking hippies, and they don't want that in their building. So I wrote a business plan. It wasn't really a formal business plan, but it was more of a proposal that would say, this is what hostels are. This is how I would run it. This is how I would keep people safe. This is how I would protect the building, all of those sort of things. So it really put them at ease. And I was really cagey about like when I was going to the owners and saying, this is what I want to do. On the phone, they would want to know what I was going to do, but I would just say, okay, I'll tell you when I get there, sort of thing. And then I would give them the proposal and try to
Sure.
explain it. So eventually, after 12 no's, I eventually got someone who said, I'll give you a 6-month lease. And this building really had a lot of problems. There was, hole in the floor. Some of the windows were knocked out. There was pigeons living in the building. And so that's one of the ways that the hostel owners who don't have a lot of money, they can put in a lot of sweat equity. Now, the risk that you take with certain landlords is that they'll take it away from you. You'll put all of this energy and fix up the building, and then they'll say, oh, we don't want to renew your lease after you've done all the work. So during that time, you're also interviewing the landlord, so to speak. Is this a landlord that you feel like you can trust? Do they have any interest of actually running a hostel themselves? Because I've seen many hostels who've started, they go into a building, they paint it and they clean it up and they get the whole business side running. And then the landlord says, no, I'm not going to renew the lease. I'm just going to run the hostel there now because I like what you're doing. So if you find landlords who seem to be very entrepreneurial themselves in a retail way,
Sure.
then that might not be a good fit. That might not be one that you want to do. But you'll also have some landlords who will be they're just real estate developers. That's all they care about is the real estate, and they want rent on their building. So what you're looking to do, and what I found with my building is a collaboration with the landlord. Like I was able to take care of his building. I guaranteed him that his building would be in better shape when I ended the lease than when I started. And I would obviously like to continue longer. And he said, okay, yeah. He was in a building that was like, what do I have to lose? I took the very small amount of money that I had, which really was nothing. It was actually, I went $8,000 in debt on credit cards to sign the security deposit and the first month's lease and all of that sort of thing. And it was May 9th of 1992. And then I started. Now, I skipped a part there. The first thing I did, then I had to go, before I signed the lease, I had to go and find out, can I actually do this? And so this is the other piece of dogged determination that was necessary for me, is you go to the town. I went to the town and I said, I'd like to run a hostel. At that time, and sometimes even now, they didn't know what a hostel was. And they're like, what's a hostel? And I says, well, it's like a hotel with bunk beds, where in bunk beds. And they say there's nothing that says what kind of furniture you have in your hotel rooms. But since you're doing a hotel in this location, then I started to get initiated into zoning and things like that. Then you're going to have conditional use permit. You have to go through a whole process with community involvement to make sure that all of the neighbors are in support of this for that particular zone. Now, this is something that you have to do your own homework because every city is different, process is different in every single city. He basically laid out this plan that would have been like, oh, millions of dollars probably to turn it into a hotel. And I was like, what is so crazy? So I actually went to the library and I start looking at the codes myself. And at that time, they had a provision that said if it's owner occupied, owner operated, 6 rooms or less, you could be a guest house. And so I was like, it is 6 rooms or less. So that's what I want to do. So I went in and I said, I would like to do a guest house. The requirements for a guest house were far less than it was for a hotel. So that's the way I was able to. Now, at the time, they said, no, and planning departments will do this anyway. And this is like a video in itself, but planning departments will never back what they say in writing unless it's by committee, generally. So one person at the planning counter will usually tell you their opinion, but they'll say, you should actually get a formal determination before. And that was a process that was thousands of dollars. And I didn't have the money to do that. So I relied on the one person at the counter and they said, this is okay. You take a risk when you do that if you don't spend those thousands of dollars to have all the meetings of the minds come together and say, yes, we could do this, or yes, that's okay. I think it's a zoning determination is what it's usually called. So that got me through. Now, if I had to go through the conditional use permit back then, I think it would have been very difficult because remember, I was all the difficulty in trying to convince the landlords that I wanted to do this. Imagine trying to convince all the neighbors that we're going to do this. So the risk that I took eventually 18 years later, the city, and it was coincidentally when the economic crisis happened and all of the building in San Francisco dried up, they came and they said, no, we want you to do that conditional use permit now. But fortunately, I had the money now to do it. And I had unanimous support from the neighborhood. I actually hired, we were in Chinatown, so I'd had a Chinese American community organizer who was able to speak the language of all of the merchants in the area. She went and said, hey, would you support the hostel? And they're like, we love the hostel. They bring all of this new money into the neighborhood. They shop in our stores. Of course, we want to keep the hostel. So now, after 18 years, I had all of this support. And then we had to go through the conditional use permit and we had to do a renovation associated with that. But it basically involved like adding ADA, all of these sorts of things. So there was definitely a huge cost associated. It was over $100,000, but at least I had the money at that point because I'd already been operating. You know, this is that dogged determination and that tenacity to find the way. A lot of new hostel owners, they want a very clear-cut path of how they can get from point A to point B to owning their own hostel. And the only way to get a clear-cut path is time and money. And it's still not clear. You may spend a lot of money and eventually the city says, no, you're not going to do a hostel here. It's not going to be permitted. But so then you have to take some more money and do something else and things like that. Hopefully that kind of answers that question of how to go through.
Definitely.
And
it's a very interesting and inspiring story, actually.
Yeah. And in terms of like where you would want to start a hostel, one of the things that you were asking, particularly because my heart and soul is in lifestyle hostels. Pick a place where you actually want to live first and foremost. So if you're running a business hostel and it's just an investment for you and you're not going to necessarily even be there, probably doesn't matter where it is. But for most successful hostels, the hostels that have that je ne sais quoi, that like magic, because they have a passionate owner operator that's there every day doing the work, they obviously need to love where they work. And they're passionate not only about their hostel, but they're also passionate about the place where their hostel exists and sharing that with people in the world. Some of the best hostels was like a home hostel up in the Olympic Peninsula, Hoh Rainforest. They just share a slice of their life. You go there and you're eating salmon with them, and your salt is actually dried up kelp from the beach that they've ground up and things like that. And those are really magical experiences because you're out of your element and you're experiencing something you wouldn't have otherwise. Surf hostels where like all they're really about is riding the waves and sharing their sweet waves with everybody else, sort of thing. Those are I think the magical hostels, first of all, too. So I wouldn't pick a hostel just based on, oh, this is going to be the best place if it's not a place that you don't want to live there anyway.
Sure. And I apologize if you've fleshed this out elsewhere. What is like your real clear definition of a lifestyle hostel versus an investment? What are the expectations for a lifestyle hostel?
A lifestyle hostel is a little bit more of like the traditional bed and breakfast, where you have an owner operator who lives on site and doing the bulk of the work. They don't have, if they have staff, it's just a few staff. It's often a couple will often be a good thing because sometimes one spouse will actually be good with maintenance and another one will be with customer service and cleaning or something. But if you're planning on outsourcing all of the aspects of your hostel, management, cleaning, having employees for every aspect of it, it's probably more in the realm of a business hostel. So yeah, for me, a lifestyle hostel is one where you're actually sharing a slice of your life with the guests. So hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that really helps shine a light on. It's a big mystery when you think about it. And at least in my case, just getting those first few steps, or even just having an inspiration from somebody else, such as yourself, makes a big difference. It helps keep focused on your dream, really.
Yeah.
And so one interesting thing that I often wondered about, which they had in Japan, I've seen it elsewhere. I'm not sure if this kind of system exists here, if it's even legal, and I'd like to hear your opinion on it. The hostel that I stayed at in Japan did not allow Japanese citizens to stay there. So was that the case for your hostel with Americans, or how do you feel about that, or what do you think about that kind of question?
It isn't something that we did. So in the United States, there are 9 protected classes. So you can't discriminate based on 9 protected classes: race, religion, nationality, I think marital status, gender, things like that, disability. Nationality is obviously one of those. So from my interpretation, nationality is a protected class. So we wouldn't say we don't want Americans to stay there. Furthermore, we would find I want Americans to actually come. Sometimes that's their first introduction to people and cultures from other countries. And so I've had so many Americans come into our hostel and they just have their mind blown, where they're like, whoa, I thought the United States was the best country, but I'm realizing there's all of these ideas and concepts and people that really add so much more value than what we've ever experienced here in the US, even from the way of just public policy and the way houses are built and all of that sort of stuff. Sometimes we've had Americans come into the hostel and they have a certain arrogance about that. And then the community says, you don't really understand what's outside of the United States too. So for that reason, I think it's very valuable to be able to have Americans stay. Now, one of the things that I will say is that most of the problems, doesn't matter where your hostel is, most of the problems that you will have with bad apples in your hostel will tend to be the ones from your own country or neighboring countries. And that's not because it's a nationality problem. It's because there's a filtering process. The further someone travels away from their home, especially when they cross an ocean, only certain sorts of people actually do that. And they just tend to be good people, respectful people, kind people. They're also, if you're in another country, you tend to be a little bit unsure of what the norm is. What should I do? So people tend to mind their manners when they're in another country more than they do when they're in their own country, because they know what the rights are in their own country. So It is sometimes a bit of a problem because you have to deal with that aspect of it in hostels. And that's why certain hostels say no Americans, and which I again think is not legal to do. We actually all opted a thing, and this could be another video, a 3-step screening process that allowed people to stay. The first one was traveler status. So traveler status is not a protected class, and obviously any nationality can be a traveler. But we wanted everyone in our community to be a traveler, and we did not want anyone who exhibited any signs of antisocial behavior. So antisocial behavior is like rudeness, evasiveness, poor hygiene can be an antisocial behavior. Because we are all living in community, and you could have somebody with those traits that totally disrupt the entire community. And that's not a protected class either. And then the final one was the ability for self-care. So there are some people who really don't have the ability to take care of themselves independently. And we don't have the resources. We don't have the social workers, caseworkers, mental health professionals in our hostel to be able to take care of that person. Now, if they have a guardian that's there with them and taking responsibility for them, then it's okay. So we actually have a flow chart that we put on, it's in the Hostel Professionals Library, of going through that. And I think it's pretty solid. It doesn't discriminate, but it still tries to maintain the character in the hostel so that you have all of these good people in the hostel and cohesive community. Mhm.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that certainly answers that question. Okay, just a basic question. Aside from the, usual business things, what were some of the real mass in getting the hostel started? What were some of the bigger, maybe unexpected challenges that you had to deal with over the course? Yeah.
I told you the one that came 18 years in.
Right.
I had to do retroactively get the conditional use permit. There are definitely times when you run a hostel when your time is not your own. So you could get up in the morning and you can have the best planned out day. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this maintenance and things. And then things just go all to hell. Like you wind up having a guest personality that you really need to deal with, or you have a washing machine that's suddenly not working and you need the washing machine, obviously, to wash the linens. And that was the thing, probably as I got older, that I felt like I didn't have the same copability, for lack of a better word. You get older, when you're young, I find that you have more time than money. And so you're like, okay, I'm doing this now. And you get older and you have more money than time. And you're just like, oh man, now I got to deal with this. So sometimes you're going in the middle of the night. And then this is obviously when I had a manager, but you're going in the middle of the night to deal with a guest that is exhibiting antisocial behavior or is not being safe to themselves. And so now you have to go talk them in off the street while it's raining and they're not really well dressed for it, and saying, hey, let's get some food. What can we do to help you? That's probably and so there's no one particular challenge. It's the challenge of the unknown that happens.
Sure.
So you have to be prepared for that. So you have to be prepared for having your life turned around. So for people who like order and schedules, it may not be a good thing. You're constantly and again, it's not like whitewater rafting. You never know what the river's going to dole out to you. So one minute you're all going down the river and everything's all fine. And next thing there's a wave and you're flipped over and now you're dealing with this mess and getting all of your passengers back in the boat. So I did whitewater rafting guide work a little bit. And so I think the analogy is perfect.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. Maybe as a last question, then, if you did it all over again, would you do it any differently? Or is there anything that really sticks out in your mind? I really wish when I, got into this business that I would have just known about this thing or something. Is there anything like that? Or is it like you said, you just got to be nimble and have passion, and that's really what you need?
Yeah, I can't say that there'd be anything that I would do differently given the circumstances that I was presented with at any particular time. Obviously, if I had lots of money when I was 26 years old, there would have been a lot of things that I probably could have solved problems preemptively. But this is the thing, is I just feel like as a small business, hostel ownership is one of the least capital intensive businesses, particularly for lifestyle hostels, that exists out there. You can literally buy your dishes in a garage sale and your guests don't care. When we first started our hostel, we got our sheets from garage sales also. And so some of the sheets would have Superman sheets on the bed. And that just becomes like this cool thing for you. Every other business, like if you tried to operate a restaurant with just things from, there are examples of that, particularly like little small, funky little cafes type things, which I love. But every other business requires so much more capital in order to start. And the conversations that you have with your guests, it's a very intimate experience. So you have these amazing, rich experiences with your guests. You meet amazing people from all over the world, and you're getting paid to do it. Like, this is where I'm like, why wouldn't you run a hostel? I love, and that's why I'm still like involved in the hostel industry, even after I sold my hostel, is I want to spread that message to other people who are like on the fence of, should I start a hostel? There's a lot of people, they may even have the real estate to do it, but they're like, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. What's it going to be? Yeah, it was a great experience. It's been a great life career compared to many other things that I could have done, like working in an office.
For sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I appreciate you being so willing and able to share these experiences and continue to promote the industry and help others navigate their way through this kind of thing. I'm obviously very much of a novice and have barely, I wouldn't even say, taken the first steps yet. Maybe I have a little bit, but it's like anything else. It's a very large undertaking when you think about it as a whole, and it
Mhm.
can be very intimidating. But I think what I certainly learned from this conversation is what my initial kind of passion and desire for, and the reasons for wanting to get into the industry or get into the business of owning and operating a hostel. I thank you for that, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of content you're putting out and in the near future, and your contributions to the professional hostel industry as well.
Yeah. And yeah, to expand on that, first of all, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So it's a lot of
Mhm.
just individual steps. But what I'm doing now, and when you get to that point where you actually have identified a building and you're going to that, I'm really trying to help other hostels. So feel free to reach out to me and other hostel owners out there as well. If you need help with your hostel, what I'm trying to do now is turn my passion for travel and into going to different hostels to help them. I have a number of hostels that I'm hoping to go to. COVID obviously makes things a little bit more complicated right now, but the idea for a lot of the content on hostel management is to have videos where I'm actually going on a pilgrimage, so to speak, to a hostel somewhere to have these sorts of conversations about each individual thing in context with an actual hostel that is having those challenges. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
I think I'm really looking forward to seeing all the different hostels and owners and guests and all those sorts of interesting people I'm sure you'll be meeting along the way and helping as well.
yeah. So just contact us. So
Yeah, for sure. All right.
great.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Thank you, Brett.